The first time Tessa Norton noticed the man with the intense gray eyes, she was balancing precariously on a wooden ladder in Seaside Stories, struggling to shelve a rare edition of Moby Dick that had just arrived that morning. The bell above the door jingled, and when she glanced over her shoulder, their eyes met for a brief moment. Something about his gaze made her fingers slip, sending the leather-bound book tumbling. She gasped, lunging forward, but the stranger moved with surprising speed, catching the book just inches from the weathered wooden floor. "Nice catch," Tessa said, climbing down the ladder with flushed cheeks. "Most of our customers don't provide rescue services for falling literature." His smile was slight but genuine. "I'd hate to witness a literary tragedy before I've even had my morning coffee." He handed her the book, their fingers brushing momentarily. He was tall, dressed in simple dark jeans and a gray sweater that somehow looked expensive despite its simplicity. His dark hair was slightly windswept, as if he'd been walking along the beach before coming in. "I'm Tessa," she said, extending her hand. "Welcome to Seaside Stories." "James," he replied, his handshake firm. "James Navarro, I'm looking for something to read while I'm in town, just visiting." Tessa asked, returning to shelving the book properly. "For a few weeks, I needed somewhere quiet to think." Tessa nodded knowingly. "You've come to the right place. Harbor Cove isn't exactly known for its wild nightlife." She gestured around the shop. "Feel free to browse. Our selection isn't huge, but we pride ourselves on quality over quantity." James wandered through the small bookshop, occasionally pulling a volume from the shelves, examining it with careful hands. There was something deliberate about his movements that intrigued Tessa as she pretended to organize the counter. The bookshop had been her sanctuary since her grandmother left it to her 3 years ago. Nestled on the main street of Harbor Cove with large windows overlooking the Pacific, it was more than a store, it was home. The scent of old books, sea salt, and the lavender sachets her grandmother had always tucked between shelves created a perfume that was uniquely theirs. After selecting 3 books, James approached the counter. "Interesting choices," Tessa commented, noting a volume of local maritime history, a contemporary novel, and a book of coastal poetry. "I like to get a feel for a place through its stories," he said. As she rang up his purchases, Tessa couldn't help but notice his hands strong but refined, no wedding ring. She chided herself for looking. "Any recommendations for coffee around here?" he asked as she handed him his change. "The Lighthouse Cafe 2 doors down." "Tell Maggie I sent you, and she might even throw in one of her lemon scones." He smiled again, this time more fully. "Thanks for the tip. I have a feeling I'll be back." True to his word, James returned the next day and the day after that. Each visit, he'd browse quietly, sometimes asking Tessa for recommendations, other times just selecting something on his own. They fell into an easy rhythm of literary discussions and light banter. He never mentioned what brought him to Harbor Cove, and Tessa never asked, enjoying the simple pleasure of their conversations without complications. On his 5th visit, during a rare moment when the shop was empty, James leaned against the counter while Tessa catalogued a new shipment. "How does someone who clearly loves literature end up in a tiny seaside town running an equally tiny bookshop?" he asked. Tessa smiled, brushing a strand of auburn hair from her face. "My grandmother opened this place 40 years ago. I spent every summer here as a kid, helping her dust shelves and sneaking reads when I should have been working. When she passed away 3 years ago, she left it to me." She ran her hand along the worn wooden counter. "I was working at a publishing house in Seattle then. Big job, fancy title, miserable hours. And you gave it all up for this?" "I did. Everyone thought I was crazy. Maybe I was," she shrugged, "but I've never regretted it. There's something about matching people with the perfect book, about knowing the stories on these shelves like old friends. It feels like purpose." James nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Most people spend their whole lives chasing success without ever defining what that means to them. Sounds like you're speaking from experience." Before he could answer, the door chimed and a group of tourists entered, ending their moment of connection. That evening, after closing the shop, Tessa took her usual walk along the beach. The autumn wind had picked up, sending white-capped waves crashing against the shore. She pulled her cardigan tighter around herself, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Mind some company?" She turned to find James walking toward her, hands in his pockets, the wind ruffling his dark hair. "Not at all," she replied, surprised by how pleased she felt to see him outside the shop. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of waves creating a backdrop to their footsteps in the sand. "This is my favorite time of day," Tessa finally said. "When everything gets quiet and the tourists head back to their rentals. I can see why. It's beautiful here." "So, are you going to tell me what brings a mysterious stranger to Harbor Cove in the off-season, running from the law, broken heart, writing the next great American novel?" James laughed, a rich sound that stirred something in her chest. Nothing so dramatic, just needed some perspective. "On what?" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "On whether I'm still the person I set out to be," Tessa nodded, not pushing further. "Heavy thoughts for a beach walk. Maybe that's why I needed the ocean." He stopped, turning to face her. "Would you have dinner with me tomorrow night? There must be somewhere in this town that serves food not covered in batter and deep fried." Tessa felt a flutter of nervousness. She hadn't dated much since moving back. Harbor Cove's dating pool was limited at best. But there was something about James that felt different, a quietness that spoke of depth rather than reservation. The Harbor View Inn has a decent restaurant, nothing fancy, but the seafood is fresh. "Sounds perfect. 7 o'clock, she nodded, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened when he smiled. The next evening, Tessa found herself standing before her closet, discarding outfit after outfit. She finally settled on a simple emerald dress that her friend Maggie always said brought out the green in her hazel eyes. She left her hair down, the auburn waves falling past her shoulders, and added minimal makeup. James was waiting outside the restaurant when she arrived, looking unfairly handsome in a navy button-down shirt and dark pants. His eyes lit up when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and Tessa felt herself blush. The restaurant was quiet for a Wednesday night, and they were seated at a corner table with a view of the harbor. Tessa watched as James studied the menu, his brow furrowed slightly in concentration. "So," she said after they'd ordered, "you've managed to dodge all my questions about yourself while getting me to tell you my entire life story over the past week. That seems unfair." James smiled, looking somewhat sheepish. "I'm not intentionally being mysterious, it's just nice to be somewhere where I'm not defined by what I do." "And what is it that you do?" He took a sip of his wine. "I run a company, Technology Solutions, primarily focused on clean energy applications." "That sounds important." It started as important, now it's just big. There was a hint of something like disillusionment in his voice. "I founded it with my college roommate 12 years ago. We had these idealistic plans to change the world, make it cleaner, more sustainable. Somewhere along the way, it became about growth projections and shareholder value." Tessa leaned forward. "So that's what you meant about perspective?" "Partly. We're at a crossroads. There's pressure to take the company public, expand into markets that are less aligned with our original mission. And you don't want that." "I don't know what I want anymore." He looked at her intently. "Except for right now, I want to have dinner with the fascinating bookshop owner who knows exactly why she does what she does." The way he looked at her made Tessa's breath catch. There was an honesty in his eyes that made her want to know everything about him. Over dinner, James opened up more, telling her about growing up in Seattle with parents who were both doctors, his decision to study engineering instead of following their path, and the friendship with his business partner, Tom, that had led to founding NavTech. NavTech. Tessa repeated, the name suddenly clicking. "Wait, you're not talking about Navarro Technology Solutions?" James nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable. "That's the one." "James, that's a huge company. I read an article about it last year." "You're not just running a company, you're the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation." He winced at her raised voice. "I am. Does that change things?" Tessa sat back, trying to reconcile the James she knew thoughtful, quiet, passionate about books with the image of a powerful CEO. "I don't know." "Should it? I hope not. That's why I didn't lead with it." In my experience, people treat you differently when they know. She studied him for a moment. Is that why you're really in Harbor Cove, to escape being James Navarro, CEO? Partly, he admitted. But mostly I needed space to think about the company's future. And then I walked into a little bookshop by the sea, and for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about business at all. The intensity of his gaze made her heart race. What were you thinking about? The captivating woman who seemed more interested in the books I was choosing than who I was or what I was worth. After dinner, they walked along the harbor, the lights from the boats reflecting in the dark water. James tentatively took her hand, and Tessa felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the mild evening. "So now that you know my secret," he said, "do I get the grand tour of Harbor Cove from a local?" Tessa laughed. "It would be a very short tour. But I could show you my favorite spots tomorrow after I close the shop if you'd like." "I'd like that very much." When he walked her to her door, a small apartment above the bookshop, James hesitated, then leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. Instead, Tessa moved closer, their lips meeting in a kiss that was gentle yet filled with promise. When they parted, she felt slightly dizzy. "Good night, Tessa," he whispered. "Good night, James." The next day, Tessa moved through the bookshop in a happy daze, replaying their dinner and that kiss in her mind. Around noon, the bell jingled and she looked up expectantly, but it was only Maggie from the cafe, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Spill it," Maggie demanded, placing 1 cup in front of Tessa. "The whole town is buzzing about you having dinner with the mysterious visitor." Tessa rolled her eyes. "Sometimes I hate small towns." "No, you don't. Now tell me everything. Who is he? What does he want? Is he single?" "Please tell me he's single." "His name is James. Yes, he's single, and he's just visiting for a few weeks." Tessa hesitated, unsure how much to share about his identity. Maggie narrowed her eyes. "There's something you're not telling me." Before Tessa could respond, the bell chimed again and James walked in, carrying a brown paper bag that smelled deliciously of fresh bread. "I thought you might want lunch," he said, then noticed Maggie. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." Maggie's eyes widened as she looked between them. "Not at all, I was just leaving." She shot Tessa a look that clearly said, "We'll talk later," before heading toward the door. "Nice to meet you, James. I'm Maggie, owner of the Lighthouse Cafe and Tessa's best friend who will absolutely grill her for details later." James laughed as Maggie left. "She seems nice." "She's a menace," Tessa said fondly. "But yes, the best kind." They shared the lunch. He'd brought fresh sourdough sandwiches and local apple cider sitting by the window overlooking the sea. The shop was quiet, with only a few customers browsing throughout the afternoon. At closing time, Tessa locked up and they set off on her promised tour. She showed him the hidden cove where locals went to avoid tourists, the old lighthouse that only opened for special occasions, and finally, her favorite spot, a small cliff overlook with a bench facing the endless horizon. "My grandmother used to bring me here when I was little," Tessa said as they sat down. "She said it was where you could see tomorrow coming." James took her hand. "What do you think tomorrow looks like?" Tessa looked at him, suddenly aware that whatever was growing between them had an expiration date. "You'll go back to your real life eventually. This feels more real than anything has in a long time." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I have to go back to Seattle for a board meeting next week, but I'd like to come back after, spend more time here. With you." Running a multi-billion-dollar company doesn't really allow for extended vacations in small coastal towns. Maybe it should. Over the next few days, they fell into a pattern. James would come to the shop in the mornings with coffee, sometimes working on his laptop in the corner while Tessa helped customers. In the evenings, they explored the town together or simply sat talking in her apartment, the lines between visitor and local, CEO and bookshop owner, blurring with each passing day. On their last evening before James had to return to Seattle, they walked along the beach as a storm gathered on the horizon. The wind had picked up, and the normally gentle waves crashed against the shore with increasing force. "I don't want to go tomorrow," James said, pulling her closer as a gust of wind whipped around them. "It's only for a few days," Tessa replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "This board meeting, it's important." We're voting on whether to accept an acquisition offer from a larger corporation. If we do, everything changes." Tessa stopped walking, turning to face him. "What do you want to happen? A month ago, I didn't know. Now," he looked out at the churning sea. "Now I'm not sure I want to keep running a company that's grown so far beyond what Tom and I originally envisioned. But walking away from something I've built for 12 years isn't simple." "What would you do instead?" James looked at her, his expression soft. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. What if I stepped back, remained on the board but let someone else take over as CEO? I could consult, work remotely, have time for." He hesitated. For what? For a life outside the office, for things that matter, for possibility. The first raindrops began to fall, fat and heavy. "We should head back," Tessa said, but neither of them moved. Instead, James pulled her into his arms, kissing her with an intensity that left her breathless. By the time they broke apart, the rain was falling steadily, plastering their clothes to their skin. Laughing, they ran back toward the bookshop, arriving drenched and breathless. Inside her apartment, Tessa handed James a towel, their fingers lingering in the exchange. "Tessa," he said quietly, "I know we've only known each other for a short time, but she placed her fingers against his lips. "Don't say it, not yet, not when you're leaving tomorrow and everything is uncertain," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "When I come back, then." The morning of his departure arrived with clear skies and calm seas, as if the previous night's storm had never happened. James kissed her goodbye outside the bookshop, promising to call every day and return as soon as the meeting was over. "I'll hold you to that," Tessa said, trying to memorize the feeling of his arms around her. The days without James stretched longer than Tessa expected. True to his word, he called every night, updating her on preparations for the board meeting, asking about her day, the shop, the town. But as the day of the meeting approached, his calls grew shorter, more distracted. On the night before the meeting, he called later than usual. "Sorry," he said, sounding exhausted. "Things have been chaotic here." The acquiring company made a last-minute adjustment to their offer, more money but more concessions on our part. "What does that mean for tomorrow?" "It means I have a difficult decision to make. A lot of people are depending on me to get this right." After they hung up, Tessa couldn't sleep, wondering what tomorrow would bring for both of them. The next day, she kept her phone close, jumping every time it buzzed, but no call came from James. By closing time, she was a bundle of nerves, wondering if his silence meant bad news for the company or for them. She was locking up when Maggie burst through the door. "Have you seen it? It's all over the financial news." "Seen what?" Maggie thrust her tablet at Tessa. The headline read, "Navtech CEO shocks board, rejects billion-dollar acquisition offer." The article detailed how James Navarro had not only voted against the acquisition, but had proposed a restructuring of the company to refocus on its original mission of sustainable technology solutions, even if it meant slower growth. "Did you know he was this James Navarro?" Maggie demanded, eyes wide. Before Tessa could answer, her phone rang. James's name flashed on the screen. "I have to take this," she said, stepping away from a very curious Maggie. "Hi," she answered. "Hi." James sounded tired but relieved. "I'm guessing you've heard by now." "Just saw the headline. You rejected the offer?" "I did. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. For the company, for me." He paused. "I also told the board I want to restructure my role. I'm staying on as chairman, but I'm stepping down as CEO. Tom will take over day-to-day operations." "James, that's a huge change. Are you sure?" "More sure than I've been about anything in years." His voice softened. "There's just one more thing I need to be sure about. Can you look outside?" Confused, Tessa walked to the shop's front window. Across the street, standing beside a rental car, was James, phone to his ear, looking directly at her. She gasped, nearly dropping her phone as she rushed to the door. James crossed the street quickly, meeting her halfway. "What are you doing here?" she asked, breathless. "I thought you were in Seattle." "I was. The meeting ended this afternoon, and I caught the first flight out. I couldn't wait another day to see you. But your company can function without me being there every minute. That's the point of the changes I'm making." He took her hands in his. Tessa, these past 2 weeks with you have shown me what I've been missing. I don't want to be the CEO who never leaves the office. I want a life with balance, with meaning. He looked into her eyes. With you, if you'll have me. What exactly are you proposing? Tessa asked, her heart racing. I'm proposing that I stay, not just for another week or month, but permanently. I can work remotely most of the time, fly to Seattle when necessary. Navtech has offices all over the world. I'm thinking it's time we opened a small satellite office in a certain coastal town. You do that. Change your whole life. I'm not changing my whole life. I'm finally choosing to live it. He cupped her face gently. I love you, Tessa Norton. I think I started falling for you the moment I walked into your bookshop, and I don't want to waste another day not telling you that. Tears welled in Tessa's eyes. I love you too, but are you sure about this, about us? The only thing I'm sure about is that I want to find out where this goes, together. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms under the glow of the street lamps, Tessa thought about how James had first entered her life, a quiet visitor browsing her shelves, hiding his identity, searching for something even he couldn't define. And somehow, between the pages of books and walks along the shore, they'd both found what they needed. 6 months later, Seaside Stories had a new addition, a small office in what used to be the storage room, where James worked when he wasn't in Seattle. The arrangement worked better than either of them could have imagined. James flew to Seattle twice a month for in-person meetings, but otherwise managed his responsibilities remotely, finding that the distance actually gave him better perspective on the company's direction. Navtech was thriving under the new structure, refocused on its original mission, but with a clearer vision for sustainable growth. And James was thriving too, finally finding the balance that had eluded him for so long. One evening, as they walked hand in hand along their beach, James stopped at the spot where they'd kissed in the rain all those months ago. I have a confession to make, he said, looking slightly embarrassed. Should I be worried? Tessa asked, raising an eyebrow. The first time I came into your shop, it wasn't an accident. I'd seen you the day before through the window. You were helping a young girl find a book, and you looked so passionate, so alive. I walked by 3 times before I got the courage to come in. Tessa laughed. Are you telling me that James Navarro, CEO of a billion-dollar company, was nervous about talking to me? Terrified, he admitted with a grin. Best decision I ever made, though. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Tessa's breath caught as he dropped to one knee on the sand. Tessa Norton, you've given me more in these past months than I found in years of chasing success. You reminded me of what really matters. He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant diamond ring. Will you marry me? Tears filled Tessa's eyes as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, Tessa marveled at how life could change so completely in such a short time. 6 months ago, she was a small-town bookshop owner with a quiet life and a predictable future. Now she was engaged to a man who had walked into her shop and into her heart, proving that sometimes the greatest stories aren't found on shelves, but in the unexpected chapters of our own lives. 1 year later, they married in a simple ceremony on the beach, with Maggie as Tessa's maid of honor and Tom as James's best man. They exchanged vows as the sun set over the Pacific, promising to build a life that balanced ambition with joy, success with meaning. Their reception was held in Seaside Stories, transformed for the evening with twinkling lights and flowers. As they danced among the bookshelves where they'd first met, James whispered, I used to think success meant having the corner office in the tallest building. Now I know it's this loving what you do, who you're with, and the life you're building together. Tessa smiled up at him. For a tech CEO, you're surprisingly poetic. Must be all those books you've been making me read. Later that night, as they stood on the balcony of their honeymoon suite overlooking the ocean, Tessa leaned into her husband's embrace. Do you ever regret it? Giving up being CEO, moving to a small town, slowing down? James looked at her with such tenderness it made her heart ache. Not for a second. Some people spend their whole lives chasing after what they think will make them happy, never realizing that happiness isn't about what you have or what title is on your business card. It's about who you share your life with." He kissed her softly. "Besides, I didn't give up anything that matters. I gained everything." As the moon cast its silvery light across the waves, Tessa thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought them together: a CEO seeking clarity, a bookshop owner who'd found her purpose, and the small seaside town that had become home to them both. In the years that followed, Seaside Stories thrived, expanding into the vacant shop next door to include a cafe and reading space. James continued his work with Nav Tech, but on his terms, finding fulfillment in guiding the company's ethical direction while having time for the life he and Tessa built together. And when their daughter was born 2 years after their wedding, a curious, bright-eyed little girl they named Eleanor after Tessa's grandmother, the family legacy of the little bookshop by the sea continued, proof that the most beautiful stories are the ones we write ourselves, one page at a time.